Hi, and welcome to the Autism Wine Hour. Today I talked to Laura Hales. Laura is an autism mom, an advocate, a TikToker, and an author. You can check her out at alexthedrummer.square.site. Really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. All right, I'm here with Laura Hales. You're an author. You're a TikToker, right? What else you have going on? Autism mom?
I feel like that makes me feel like I'm trying so hard to be a youth, one of the youths, but
Yeah.
I use that platform and I've met a lot of great people. Rosie O'Donnell followed
Really?
me 2 days ago and
That's
said
cool.
hello. So we're now best friends, apparently.
Yeah.
We're gonna get matching necklaces, not really, but it's happened. I think when Rosie O'Donnell follows you, it means you've made
No,
it.
it means you made it. Like
Yeah.
you're official.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I almost told you how old I am, like that was helpful at all.
I mean, you can do that
This is
too.
how much I weigh.
Yeah.
This is my worst fear. No, so I'm an author of these two books. If you're listening, you can't see what I'm pointing to. I'm not just giving a peace sign. I'm
Yeah.
pointing upward to my books back there. The third one is currently being illustrated, but the manuscript is finished. And they are true stories about my autistic son. I actually have two autistic sons. One prefers more anonymity in the world, and so I absolutely respect his privacy and give him that. Also in these books, it's called Alex and the Drummer. My son's name that it's based on is actually not named Alex, just in case when he gets older and prefers to not be known as that kid, because obviously they're going to become outrageously famous and he's going to be recognized everywhere.
Well, he has
now.
like an Aunt Rosie O'Donnell now.
Right?
Yeah.
Auntie Rosie is just going to make it happen.
For sure.
And so one of the reasons why I started publishing books is that when you get the diagnosis of your child being autistic, you suddenly find that your whole projection on how things are supposed to go is going in a different direction. And all the years that you have thought of how you're going to be a parent are out the window.
Yeah.
What you need a different game plan. And so as I began my research on what I can do to help, one of the things you do for your kids is look for exciting children's books for them. And if they happen to have one about, if you have a child with red hair and you find a book about a little girl with red hair, like that's exciting because they see themselves and that representation, and it's really exciting for them. And I found that there were two categories of children's books about autism. It was either this pretty toxic superhero power kind of, it's all positivity, not at all a disability kind of vibe, which didn't resonate with me. I get where those people are coming from, and I think it's wonderful that they're trying to be positive in life. That didn't resonate with me. Or it was the very clinical sort of awareness piece about autism. Like, this is Johnny's autistic. That means that he may stim. Stimming is this. It could look like this. And that's fine, but no one wants to read that.
No one's going to connect with that.
And yes, and connection. That's exactly it. As much as it can be informative, just like I'm not super interested in a textbook, and a lot of other families and other kids aren't going to be interested in reading facts about autism. But a story, on the other hand, and especially when they can realize that it's a true story, this really happens, then they start to develop an emotional connection to the characters in the story. They find themselves being able to put themselves in my son's shoes and in my shoes as a parent. And that's something that's tricky to do when you're talking about someone that is autistic or has a neurodiversity. And it's so much less them and us, and so much more the human experience, and that we all experience it differently, but it's all very human, and that there are so many very valid reasons for behavior, and that's what these stories tell. So it's so fun to read to kids or read to other adults and then have them so devastated when something happens in the book, when if they were observing that as a bystander, they would be like, what is that kid's problem?
Right.
It's just this. What is the big deal? But because they're looking at it from an empathetic point of view and they're in the story, they're within
Yeah.
the context,
Yeah. Their perspective has changed.
and then they're rooting for you,
For sure.
and that's the best. And the kinds of comments I get from grandparents and parents and teachers and special educators and special education aides about this helped me understand that. And there's two main goals of my book: to normalize stimming, that we all stim whether we are autistic or not.
Right.
Many of our neurotypical stims are quite strange. You take them out of their social context, like laughing
Sure.
is really weird.
Yeah.
And
No
it's
doubt.
just like, I find that humorous, whatever that means. So like I have this huff of air that comes out rhythmically, sometimes with a vocalization.
Yeah. I've never really
And
thought of
everyone
it.
has a
That.
different kind of
Yeah.
laugh. And sometimes people get it, sometimes people don't. And that's really strange. And yet when an autistic child, maybe jumps or flaps their hands or makes like a vocal stim of excitement and that they understood that or thought it was funny, we look at that and we're like, no, that's weird. But
Right.
this whole laughing thing that these
Yeah.
neurotypicals do,
Yeah.
that's totally acceptable. That makes sense. That's distracting.
That's a really good point.
And that's just,
Yeah.
hey, quiet down a little bit.
You're not doing the weird thing that everyone else is doing is pretty much what makes it stand out. That's really interesting.
And showing that to people through story. People learn
Yeah.
so much better through stories than they do. And it's not that the information isn't important, it just doesn't connect with emotion.
Yeah.
And then there's no desire to have the world be a better place. There's no drive. There's no, now I am involved. I am motivated to help bring acceptance to these people. This is part of my responsibility now, to make this world a better place and a more accepting place. You asked me for an intro. I told you all about my books, all about stimming. You can ask more questions if you.
So while we're on the topic of books, what are they called and where can people find them?
Oh, sure. So the first one, let me just read back here. The first one is Alex and the Drummer, and that's my son right there, and he has his ear defenders on, and here's the drummer, and the drummer is a real thing, and it's this, those wacky inflatable arm flailing tube, one of those in Korea, but it's in the shape of a drummer, and instead of its arms waving, its drumsticks look like it's banging on the drum. And so my son and I use this as part of a difficult transition process where he had to go from one school to his Korean preschool every day, which was a tricky transition. And we tried to include some positive moments in that transition. Don't you want to say hi to the drummer? The drummer wants to know how you did today. The drummer is me in the front seat going, hello, my boy. How did you do today? Because obviously that's how someone that looks like that would speak.
Yeah, for sure.
Of course. And then one day we pass and the drummer is deflated. And and that's where I love that anyone else seeing that would be like, okay, and then what? But anyone who knows or is in the context of the story is like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh no, what are they gonna do? And then the second one, I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger in that first one. You're like, well, I just
have to read the book.
They're just still there probably.
Yeah.
At waiting for him to, I don't know, some miracle to happen. The second one is Alex and the Muffin Man. And this one talks about food aversions. And again, they're all true stories. And they each involve a member of the community that we don't know. In the first book, it was a Korean man. So we didn't even speak really the same language. I can't say that I speak Korean. I speak broken Korean and K-pop Korean. And that's food Korean. That's
probably more
just the
than
basics, just the essentials. And in this case, it was the grocery store manager. And it was during COVID times when we were overseas and shipping was really held up. And there was something that my child, it was one of his like 4 or 5 safe foods at the time, had been out for weeks. And what I love is that when my editor went through my manuscript for it, and she's fantastic, I'm probably not as well versed with the autistic community. There was a point where I described that these foods, they feel too icky or too slimy or too broken or too crunchy or too rough. And she simplified that to that he was picky. And I was like,
Hmm.
nope.
Yeah.
But thank you for proving my point. That it's so much less about choices for a lot of our artistic. Do you ever do that?
Yeah.
I
Sometimes.
heard autistic so
Yeah.
often that sometimes it just ends up being artistic. Um, and a lot of my autistic friends are artistic. Um, yeah, but the way that she very poignantly pointed out that it's not often about choice,
Hmm.
often about with what my mind and body are telling me are allowed.
Yeah.
What can I do? And that doesn't mean that we can't build our tolerance to things through really positive experiences and slow trust building kinds of exercises. um, but it's not just about being picky.
Yeah. I liked how you use all the sensory terms. That's a good way to describe it.
There's so much more going on that
Yeah, for sure.
people realize. And who hasn't experienced a meltdown with their child or themselves at the grocery store?
Yeah,
I think everyone can relate to seeing that kid and their mom,
for
like,
sure.
just pulling down everything on
Yeah.
the aisle walls. And the third one, Alex and Santa, is the first time that we have been back in the United States. And we live in Virginia. And we came across a man mid meltdown who
Hmm.
um, looked a lot like Santa and made
Okay.
Santa because he introduced himself as Santa and
Nice.
literally talked like this. I'm Santa Claus, and so I see you're trying real hard, and I think that you're doing really great. Um, and we had just, like I said, had this probably biggest meltdown. And putting it into perspective, we had just traveled over the last 24 hours previously
Hmm.
across the world. Our time zone had changed by 16 hours.
That's tough.
And I mean, our kids and autistic individuals and any individual, a change like that is huge.
No, that's really hard.
But for an autistic child, we don't have home anymore. That's something that's variable and new.
Hmm.
We're staying in an Airbnb as we search for a home. The language is different. People look different. The sensory is different. The TV commercials are different. Everything is different. And sleeping is weird, and what you're eating, you're hungry at weird times. And so there was just a meltdown absolutely made sense,
That's tough.
made perfect sense. And we had been in an airplane for what, like 20 hours,
Yeah.
just hopping different flights. But yeah, and there were unfortunately were some younger people in the store that we were at who laughed when we had that big
Mm.
meltdown. And I don't necessarily blame them. I don't really blame people when they react poorly, um, especially young people. I
Yeah.
just
They just
think
don't know better.
they don't know, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I do, if I have the presence of mind, say something like, "That's really rude. He's trying his
Hmm.
best." And I don't, I truly try not to overreact because then it's harder for people to learn lessons when they feel defensive. So
Yeah.
just trying to, hey, just so he's autistic
Yeah.
and he's really doing his best. So
Yeah.
what
So
I
where
will
can people find your books at?
else. So they're on Amazon. You can also order through my site, which is alexandthedrummer.square.site. Obviously, would I prefer you order them through me than Amazon? Of
For sure.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when it's through Amazon, I think I get like $2 per book.
Hmm.
So roll
Yeah.
the dough, obviously.
Yeah. For sure.
The profit margin is obviously bigger if you buy them from
Yeah.
the author who makes them. And I sign them all in the second book, and I'm doing this in the third. So if there are any autistic artists out there, professional and not, amazingly talented or amateur, I have in the front 2 pages. This is artwork from autistic adults
Oh,
and
that's great.
children from all over the world. Like there's Brazil and India, some outrageously talented
Yeah.
individuals.
Smells really cool.
And then there's this one from a cute little girl called Banana Cat. So, I mean, all the
Yeah.
essentials are covered.
Nice.
But yeah, that submission time is open now. Publication space is so expensive.
Yeah.
And as I thought about, usually in the front and back of book, there's those end pages that are like a solid color or like a pattern of some kind.
Yeah.
And I was like, what kind of pattern would I like? What would be cute? And then I thought, what a great space to feature people who I'm
For
trying to
sure.
highlight even more.
No doubt.
And I'm also highlighting some other TikTokers who have, either businesses or are artists themselves, and having a little blurb about them so that, again, other autistic children and adults and parents of autistic children can look at these people and see such a variety of what can be success. I hate
Yeah.
saying success as if that means now they're totally verbal and doing presentations and now they're a doctor and whatever it is. That's not success.
Yeah.
Often those are some of the unhappiest people, right? But people who have come into their own, who have been given the appropriate and lawful rights to education and
Mhm.
to community programs, and their parents have had resources to build community and have respite care, and and to see what that can bring to an autistic individual
Yeah.
and the kind of life they can choose for themselves is what I really think success is, as far as any child, but particularly an autistic child. I think we often think, because we're so focused on uh, deficiencies
Hmm.
and goals and how to achieve that goal, and being like I'm also an advocate for autistic children in public education, so it's not like I don't value goals. Those are
Yeah.
absolutely necessary, but often we reduce children down to
Just to the
goals,
goals. Yeah.
and that success or a happy child lies at the end of that goal and
Yeah.
reaching that goal, when a whole child is so much more than the accomplishment of goals, and we all are,
Hmm.
right? But I don't know about you, I don't have IEP goals for myself in my
No.
life that are
Yeah.
like 3 out of 4 times Laura will check her attitude before she talks to her husband. You know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
don't do that.
Yeah.
And we do the exact same thing to children. And again, I'm not saying that that's bad. Having focused, very specific things that can help autistic children grow is essential. Um, but then celebrating who they are right now, and celebrating that, and always reminding them and yourself that they're the ones in charge. This is their life. They are a whole human being.
Yeah.
And they're so much more than the summer progress of what they do in school, or, progress in therapies, progress with doctors. It's what we're constantly talking about
Yeah.
as parents with other people,
No, you're
is
right.
goals and their progress or lack of progress. And there's so much more than that.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Thank you.
So where can people find you on TikTok?
On TikTok, Laura Hales 28. It's
Okay.
my name. And
Okay.
if you look up autism advocacy, probably on TikTok, you'll probably find me.
Okay.
Instagram is growing. It's the drummer stories. I'm on Facebook. That's a moderate following. And I feel like TikTok is fun for short videos. I can explain a lot of things, and it makes me be succinct about it because I
Yeah.
got 60 seconds to explain this
Yeah.
outrageously complicated, topic of discussion. But I find that Facebook, because it's not just videos, it's posts, it's images, it's infographics, it's Facebook events that I can coordinate. So I do a lot of, excuse me, advocacy events that people can hop on there, or I do like music and movement events. So my degree is in secondary music education.
Cool.
And I use a lot of my autism loving, deep searching self and my background in music education to combine it into this really lovely, diversity affirming music time. And it's held at a place called the Sensory Farm, which is literally a farm that has a pig and goats.
Oh, that
They
sounds
have
awesome.
huge play area in the back that's just very, um, wildernessy and woodsy, but still safe and accessible, which
Yeah.
is, I don't know
Yeah.
how
Pretty
she
important.
happened
Yeah.
that she did. So we have music and movement time, and then we get to hang out with the goats.
Goats are always cool.
And goats make any time a better time.
For sure.
Yeah, my life motto.
Yeah.
Get down for sure.
Great. Yeah.
How about
So
more about
hopefully,
you?
so I own an ABA company,
Okay.
and so that's kind of how I got the idea for this podcast. Is I get a lot of like calls and emails from people who are just diagnosed or like seeking the kind of first time ABA treatment, and they don't really know, like there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of like fear, and they just don't know what their life's going to look like. And I kind of looked around for a place to kind of send them to. Maybe I'm a podcast nerd. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I was like, oh, there's got to be like a podcast that people talk about like success stories or like lessons learned about their kind of experience through autism. I really couldn't find one that resonated with me. So I was like, well, it might be cool to try to start one and see how it goes. So we're
Same
pretty early.
with me
I
with
think that,
books.
yeah,
You
pretty early in it. This is our sixth episode, I think.
okay?
So pretty small, but it's been fun. It's the feedback's been pretty good. So
Good.
I'm gonna keep doing it until no one watches. So it's yeah. So
Well,
it's it.
just need to get Rosie O'Donnell's attention, and then
Yeah,
maybe I can send her over and be like,
for
Rosie,
sure. Yeah. Can
oh
you
my guy,
share a number or something?
type like that for sure. She followed
Excuse
me,
me.
so that
Yeah, yeah,
for
you're
that
tight.
for sure.
Yeah, but I kind of I listen to a lot of like technology podcasts, and I'm a big technology nerd. And this new thing called Chat GPT came out, so I
Uh,
was like, oh, like maybe I'll use that to kind of write me up some questions for a lessons learned podcast for parents with kids with autism, and it spit me out some pretty interesting questions. So
ooh,
we'll kind of go through what the AI suggests I asked to
yeah,
have like an informative conversation.
I love that. Go
Yeah.
for it.
All right. So the first one is, when did you first suspect your child had autism, and was there a particular event that led you to seek out a diagnosis?
Yeah, I feel like this is such a not prevalent, but like people often ask this question because they have
Hmm.
concerns about their own child, and
Yeah.
then they see a lot of other children being diagnosed, right? And so they're thinking,
Yeah.
am I missing something? Am I missing some big signs? For me, obviously, when my second child was diagnosed, I was already in a different mindset as
For
far as
sure.
my child.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah.
that was a little bit different. But for my first son, um, things just felt harder than I anticipated they would be. And
Hmm.
harder, I just mean I thought that I must not be parenting very well. Because what I did, I thought was very thorough, consistent, um, very like super nanny approved,
Yeah.
very calm. We didn't yell. Um, and I just thought I was doing so many of the right things. And yet I would observe other people I was close with, and they're kind of, um, and not a judgment on them, but they're kind of more laid back approach to parenting, kind of a laissez faire kind of parenting.
Hmm.
And their kids, weren't perfect, but they were okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean okay like autistic children are not okay, but like what I observed about their behavior was that it was, within a typical
Yeah.
expectation. Um, and I remember feeling like I just don't know either what I'm doing wrong or why does he keep being so naughty or making such choices. So a lot of internal things going on.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's very typical
Yeah.
of parents to experience. I think there's also a tricky dynamic between partners who, uh, one is the primary worker who is often out of the home, and one is the primary caregiver who's often in the home with the most one-to-one time with the child. And that's not to say one parent is failing and one is not. There's just so much to be done in a
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And I think it often puts the sort of breadwinner in a position of not having a lot of that one-on-one observation time
Hmm.
with the child. Or when they do have time with the child, it's more of a novelty for the child. So it's very exciting,
Yeah.
and they're less burnt out as a parent. Um, so it's just different. But I really think that puts the breadwinner partner in a more difficult position of accepting or considering the possibility of a diagnosis, because
Hmm.
it's just less observation time. It's generally the caregiver partner who's bringing the child to the pediatric visits, who's bringing the child to the dentist, and they come home and they're like, honey, I don't know
Yeah. It
what to
was
tell
like a
you,
rough day or,
kicking, screaming, that we couldn't get that dental appointment done. And the other partner isn't often there for those kinds of events. So they're getting this secondhand story or interpretation of everything. They're having to
yeah.
hear it through the lens of their partner. So then they have to like think about, is this a my partner thing?
Yeah.
Is this really my child struggling that much? There's an extra person in there. Um, and then there's their homemaker partner who uh, can often feel very isolated in their what
For
they
sure.
see in their child, and feeling like they're not being believed, or that they are being accused of being dramatic, or
Right.
well, it's just not a big deal, I'm sure it's not that bad, or whatever it is, and it's just never a good place to be. So I have found that with a lot of families, that dynamic ends up being quite an issue. It
Yeah.
comes up frequently with parents and families that I talk to. I don't even remember your original. Oh yeah, now I remember. That's me and my honesty. So with my first son, I remember a specific incident where he was struggling in like a preschool,
Hmm.
like an actual preschool, but like a preschool.
Yeah.
And the teacher would say some things that to me are like, oh yeah, he does that all the time. But she would say them in a way that it's like,
It was concerning.
oh,
Yeah.
well, and she was very kind about it. I don't know how well I would have handled it if she had said, so therefore, I think you might want to have him tested for being
Hmm.
autistic. So I think she made the right call. Eventually, I went and saw them in like a little end of year singing thing, and my child was under a table like on the side,
Yeah.
and the other kids, and there were some antsy ones, there were some wiggly ones, but they were up there singing ish,
Yeah.
and my kid was under the table. And I think a big hindrance for me in accepting the idea that my child could be autistic, or more than just he's just a boy, is because that's what I heard from every well-meaning
Right.
person around me.
Right.
Was when I expressed those concerns, when I said, well, I'm just not sure. It was, well, he's a boy. Boys are wild. Oh, you should have seen your husband when he was little. He ran around everywhere, and and oh, that's just how they are. And so I know that people mean well with that. People are uncomfortable with other people being uncomfortable, so they
Yeah.
try to make the solve, right?
Hmm.
Um, but because you can't really solve those kinds of feelings, you can't solve feelings, period. But it just ends up making you feel like you're crazy. Well, you
Yeah.
be crazy. You must just not be a very good parent. Apparently, this is so very similar to every other parent's experience, and yet I, as a human being, am falling apart and barely able to get through every day at the pace that my child requires me to
Yeah.
parent him. So eventually, we brought him to. I had one very kind occupational therapist friend, and at that point, I had no idea what occupational therapy was, which I can't even imagine a life where I don't know what occupational therapy. She said, you might want to get him tested. It never hurts.
Yeah.
And best case scenario, you find out he is, and you get him the help he needs, and you get clarity for yourself, and you get a lot of answers.
Yeah.
And other best case scenario, he isn't. So it wasn't best or worst, it was just best and best.
Right.
And other best, he isn't. Maybe there's something else going on, but it's just more information. It doesn't
Yeah.
change reality. It doesn't make anything up or make anything happen. It's just
Yeah.
arming you with more tools to help your child. So because of her, the one person who was like, she didn't even say, yes, you should. She
Yeah.
just, well,
Just maybe. Yeah.
and I'm really grateful to her for
Yeah,
that.
that's really great advice. That's something I run into on my end.
Mhm.
With we'll get people that be like, "Hey, my kid's having these issues," and pretty much to afford ABA therapy to get the insurance to pay for, it, you need that diagnosis. So that's always my first question. And it's like, "Well, does your kid have a diagnosis? Have you looked into that?" And I was initially pretty surprised at kind of the resistance to it, but it totally makes sense. People are like, "Oh no, I don't want to do that," or "No, I really don't want to get them tested," or "I don't want to have this diagnosis," because it's a big pill to swallow.
Sure.
That like a big, and I think you have to kind of be ready to accept that. And some people are kind of resistant to it, but it's having that diagnosis really opens up a lot of doors for therapy and to make just positive progress in the kid's life.
Right.
So I
Well,
think
and
that
I
was
tell
really good
people, like,
advice.
I love and hear you as a person because I know you're a person, parent, dear parent,
Yeah,
you're a person. I'm gonna be really harsh and tell you to put yourself aside. Your kid needs it.
yeah,
So again, if I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying, but for me, it was like I almost needed someone to say, do it.
yeah,
And in a whole world of other people trying to be polite about my feelings, I just needed one person to say, do it.
for
And
sure.
so I tell people, look, I hear you, totally valid. There's a lot. I do therapy myself. I have a therapist. I love therapy, super essential for me. Put yourself aside, do therapies. You will make it through.
Yeah,
There are supports for you, but not having a diagnosis when you have an autistic child is so much worse
yeah, 100%.
than the alternative. So
So what was that like for you? Like what kind of emotions did that bring up? Like what was that experiences like finding that news out?
I mean, I feel like it was typical of a lot of people's because usually by that point they've had suspicions for quite a while.
Hmm.
They've had a lot of internalized guilt about I must have done something wrong. I didn't necessarily have that more outdated look of, what medicine did I take when I was pregnant or whatever
Yeah.
that is. Um, I more had that internalized guilt of, it must be meaning I'm a bad parent.
Mm.
And that's so when I received that diagnosis, it was like, I knew it. I knew I was doing everything I could.
Yeah.
And now that I know, well, that's because I'm working with an Xbox instead of a PlayStation. I've been
Yeah.
putting all these, like, I've been downloading all these games.
Yeah.
I've been
Hitting the
using the
wrong
wrong
buttons.
controller. I've been, yeah,
Yeah.
pushing the wrong buttons. And um, now I know that I'm dealing with a whole different system. It's not a wrong system, but I have the tools. So I
Yeah.
felt very validated
Yeah.
at that time. I obviously felt like, um, so what you're saying, doctor, is that this high level of effort that I am required, that my child needs, as far as from a parent, is not just through toddlerhood.
Yeah.
You're saying that this is potentially forever.
Yeah.
That was very, very difficult. Um, and I've made a couple videos about this, but there's a lot of um, social media videos that are like, oh, children, let them be little. They're only
Hmm.
little for so long. And it's one of the things that can get parents through toddlerhood because it's one of the most demanding
Yeah.
times of parenting a child because their needs are just so high. They need assistance in the bathroom. They need assistance with feeding. Their emotional intelligence, their maturity, their cognitive abilities are all at this just like really difficult place where they're clashing with each other.
Hmm.
They know that they want something, don't know how to get it, and they know that mom's not giving it to them, but don't know how to express that. Um, but you can hang on to, but this won't be forever.
Yeah.
Let them be small and just remember treasure these moments because it'll fly by
It's
and
temporary.
it's not
Yeah.
that's not the case for a lot of us parents, and that's at no fault of the child, of course. That's just
So yeah,
a reality. And I think any parent who doesn't feel the immensity of that responsibility is not fully understanding what the future may look like.
for sure.
Now, that doesn't mean that every child who is autistic is going to be living at home with their parents for the rest of their lives. All autistic individuals have such a varied amount of
Yeah,
capabilities and areas that they can make really immense strides in. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean success or happiness. And that is also not in the cards for every autistic individual. So sometimes I see in sort of the autistic parent of autistic children culture this really hyper focus on those kind of successes, as if, well, if that child can do it, so can mine. And that could be true, absolutely. And those are really wonderful things to be proud of. This autistic individual went to college. This autistic individual now owns this business or is a public speaker. But I think it can often mean that those people who that's not going to be their journey or isn't their journey, that's kind of separation
yeah,
from even a group that they already feel separated from, society itself
yeah,
within the autistic community. And then their autistic child isn't doing autism right. They're even failing in the
yeah,
autistic community. Um, I think it can be such a disservice to the child. I just think of the emotional trauma and repercussions to a child who feels like they are always failing,
mm,
that they, no matter what task they are given, that they are just a sum of their goals, that their value as a human relies on success in, separated areas of judgment and approach. When really so many of them are kids and
yeah,
really fun and really silly. And I think we sometimes forget to venture into their world and see what they find funny, um, and join them and celebrate with them
for
in
sure.
the way that they enjoy. We often want them to come into our world and perform in ways that we want them to perform, and there's a necessity for that, right? So that
Yeah,
they have the tools to make decisions as an adult that they would like to. We are offering and facilitating more independence for them as they get older. So it's not like those are bad things. It's just that balance. It's so hard. The black and white things, I feel like we can put that check next to
yeah,
it. The gray areas where we have to remember the emotional toll that it can take on a child to only focus on goals, and we forget to celebrate the child as they are and all their unique characteristics and interests, can be tricky.
yeah.
And yet, as parents, we're not these um, therapeutic experts. We're
No,
just
there's
random
no book that
people.
comes with it. Yeah, you just
Yeah, and so the responsibility is immense. And so that's why I have my social media platforms, is because as a parent, I want to be a source of, oh, I wish I had someone saying that when I had first started,
yeah,
especially in the IEP process. I wish someone had told me, 10 years ago that the administration isn't necessarily on my side. And by
for
my
sure.
side, I mean my child's side. They have a lot
Yeah,
of other things going on. Doesn't mean they're evil. There's just a lot of other motivations and things that they are having to work with. And for
yeah,
me, there's one motivation, and that's my child's rights. So yeah, just in vocalizing some things that um, we just often don't talk about, or no one talks about. And then also talking about them in a way that doesn't embarrass or exploit my kids. Because again, they are individuals who deserve the privacy that they would like, and who don't deserve to have their most vulnerable moments and struggles on social media,
yeah.
or private information shared, or their parent catastrophizing uh, their diagnosis publicly about, I don't know, oh, my life is so awful, or in spite of how difficult my kids have made my life,
Yeah.
now I'm this justice seeking parent, and using their kids almost as like a stepping stone, or they're
Mhm.
just this medal of honor, this badge of honor. Um, and help, I don't know, helping provide parents that perspective that I wish I didn't have to go through all the other ugly phases to
Yeah.
get to where I am, where I can just, if people are staring at us in public, I can just laugh. I couldn't really care less. uh, that my kids know that I stand up for them in any situation, whether it's with school people or with friends, or when we're public and someone says something, that my mom has my back.
Yeah.
um, and that I care so much more about what they think and feel than I do about some random older lady in a grocery store who's shaking their
Right.
finger at my child who's having a meltdown.
Yeah.
um, so
So what
yeah.
advice could you give to other parents who would just be like receiving that diagnosis to kind of absorb that blow and kind of move forward from it, or like work on acceptance or figuring out what their life is going to look like? What advice could you give to people in that situation?
Well, one of the things that I feel like has been important to me is learning that feelings are just feelings. They're not necessarily a good or a bad thing, they just exist.
Yeah.
So, like, my eyebrows exist, my ears exist. Um, when you start assigning them a category of, well, you should feel ashamed for that, or you should really focus on that one, and that's a good one, it makes it harder to move forward without resentment, or without creating this need within you to always have things turn out a certain way. So if you can, it's about like finding contentment and joy and excitement in the present and celebrating every moment you can. And then also simultaneously, or every other minute, totally embracing the suck, which is
Yeah.
a Marine term, and also a Brene Brown term, where it's just, you can just look at it and be like, wow, that experience sucked so bad. I feel
Yeah.
so embarrassed. I am flushed. I am sweaty. That lady was looking at it when it was happening, and I'm so humiliated. And then I feel bad that I feel humiliated because this is my child. I shouldn't feel humiliated. And just owning all of that.
Yeah. It's a
Hard
lot to process.
there's so much. So
Yeah.
just knowing that feelings are feelings and they will happen. It doesn't make you a good or bad person. And then if you don't feel equipped to be able to pull apart those feelings in a healthy way, which, let me tell you, if you are parenting children with disabilities, that's often the case.
Yeah.
Again, we're not therapists. A lot of times our role as parent requires us to be at a therapist-like level of thinking, but we're not therapists. So if you can, I know that's a financial privilege, if you can afford therapy, absolutely find a therapist.
Yeah. That's great advice.
It's one of those that, like, we all say, yeah, therapy's great, and then
Yeah.
we don't go through the effort of finding one for ourselves.
Mhm.
um really do, if it's at all possible. We spend so much of our lives 100% focused on the needs of our kids, and I I have a hard time even now not laughing at people's faces when they say, "But when do you take time for yourself?" I'm like, they're like, "What hobbies do you have? When do you go out with your girlfriends?" And I'm like, "I don't know
Yeah.
who you think I am. I have like -7 hours a day.
Yeah.
So when I do have 20 minutes besides showering and maybe eating, I will play solitaire on my phone. That is my current hobby.
Nice.
That's it. And that's honestly all I have time for right
Yeah.
now. And that's not because I'm not prioritizing myself. That's not because I don't understand the need for an individual to have those things. That's
Mhm.
because I do not. have the mental, emotional capacity to continue all of that all the time.
Yeah.
So I wish more parents and other people knew that this is the best we can, and the
Yeah.
best you can is okay, and the best you can is really hard. And if you're having a hard time, you're probably doing a really great job, honestly.
Yeah. No doubt.
It's not the other way around. It's not like, well, I know I'm doing a great job because this feels easy or this worked. It's just, are you trying? Yeah. Are you still here? Are you there
Yeah.
for your kid? Yeah. Well, then you're doing it. You
For
haven't given
sure.
up. So
Yeah.
you're doing it. Yeah.
You pretty much answered this question, but this is the next artificial intelligence question was what was the impact of autism on your own mental health, and how have you managed to maintain your self-care? So it sounds like therapy was big for you.
Therapy.
Yeah.
And a lot of aha moments for myself with therapy that had anyone else told me something, I'd say, yeah, 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 sure, sure.
Hmm.
But having a therapist tell me was different. For example, one of the things I learned in therapy, my biggest aha moment was my therapist said, you know that your children are entire human beings outside of yourself. And I was like, hold on,
Yeah.
hold on a second. Can you say that again? I literally said, can you say that again? And she said, so my kids' names are Noah and Leo. Noah and Leo have their whole own worldview and set of experiences totally outside
Yeah.
of what you think and feel. Now, did I know that? Yeah.
Yeah.
If anybody else had told me that, I'd be like, yeah, I know. Okay, thanks, bye. But coming from her in the context of what we had been discussing this whole time, I realized that that's why so many of their meltdowns, their struggles were so difficult for me, because I considered them an extension of myself, a
Yeah.
reflection of my parenting, a reflection of if I have been successful as a parent or not successful, whether my children were good kids or not good kids. And when I considered that this isn't me and my experience, this is my experience, and my kid is having their whole own separate experience during this very public meltdown.
Yeah.
That's the experience that I am concerned about. Not my experience in worrying about these other people, but my experience worrying about his experience. And once that focus shifted, and
Hmm.
I was put so much more effort and energy not into helping other people feel okay about what's happening or act like I'm doing the right mom things. Once I could shift, because I was putting a lot of effort into that, once I could shift that into, how can I help you? What's going on? Let's get you to a safe place. I'm not mad. I just want to help you feel okay.
Yeah.
Once I could focus it there, so much easier. And that took like
Yeah.
a decade. So I'm not saying that like, yeah, I just thought about it and I was like, okay, thanks. To the point where I wrote down what she said. I was like, do you have paper? Because in this moment, I'm not only understanding it here mentally, but I'm also understanding that emotionally that I do
Yeah.
that. And
It kind of
again,
sounds like you just figured out to focus on things you could control.
yes,
Things that outside of your control, you just kind of learn to let go, and you focused on the things that you actually were able to have an impact on.
right.
Yeah.
And the long term or short term implications of their behavior. Um, Whether they choose to, do something that looks silly or is disruptive or whatever, does not mean I'm a good or bad parent.
Hmm.
Those don't directly, there's no direct causation between those two things.
Yeah.
This is so much less about me, this moment he is having, and all about him. And when I could remove myself, his behavior is not personal for me. He is struggling.
Hmm.
How can I? So when I realize he's struggling, instead of he's giving everyone a hard time,
Yeah.
how can, and then it was just like, who cares about these people? I don't know these people. These people don't matter to me.
For sure.
They're experiencing an inconvenience for 10 minutes on a subway.
Yeah. Not a big deal.
No. And the relationship that I have, this individual, my child, is the rest of my life.
Mhm.
and will have an effect on him and how he functions within the world, how he views the world, how he views relationships and trust for the rest of his life. That is of so much more value and worth than what these random people think for 10 minutes. So they think I'm a terrible mom, that I spoil my kid, whatever it is
Yeah,
for
no
10
big deal.
minutes. Cool. High
Yeah,
five you on the way out.
yeah,
You can think that. My child, knowing that I am there for him, I am his safe space, I am there to co-regulate with him, that I care first and foremost about his physical and emotional safety above all else, no matter where we are, no matter who we're around. That kind of impact that it could have on a child is like, that's a that's a
yeah, that's
no-brainer kind
big
of decision, you know?
for sure. So, how have you gone about finding support and resources for your family, and how have those different things been helpful?
Um, Sheesh. So I feel like when my kids were first diagnosed, there weren't a lot of resources. Facebook was a thing, but it wasn't like a communities thing.
Hmm.
It was just you had your old college
Right.
email address, you could get an account or whatever. It was an evolution from MySpace, right? But now there's so many more communities of niches available. So for me, it wasn't, I mean, I made the groups that I needed, honestly, is what I did. Um, there weren't people I could relate to, unfortunately. And it has taken until maybe the last 3 or 4 years when Facebook groups are so much more interactive. You can meet people around the whole world. You can meet people very locally who can say, I really recommend this therapist. I really recommend this doctor. Hey, I'm having an issue with insurance. What have you experienced? Who's a good food therapist in town? I wouldn't visit this professional. They had this to say, kind of an outdated term, or whatever it is. Um, it's other parents,
Yeah,
honestly, where you really find, because we're in the exact same boat.
for sure.
And that doesn't mean that other professionals like yourself don't have amazing things to contribute and talk about, and all of your experience and expertise. Um, but I do find a particular value in a shared perspective.
Mm.
Um, and there have been times where, I'm talking to either a food therapist or, uh, food therapist, for example, who gives such unreasonable goals and expectations. They're like, yeah, so just throw sugar away. And I'm like,
Yeah, that's
we can't, so we can't do that.
yeah,
And can we find something that's like a more reasonable? But to them and their experience, they're coming from a clinical perspective of
right.
this would be the best method, the most efficient. And they're not coming from the perspective of a parent,
Hmm.
caring for a whole family, that they're also working a full or part-time job. They also have other responsibilities. They're trying to somehow keep up with housework and make food for kids.
Yeah,
And then somehow mentally, emotionally survive themselves within all of that. And so having that parent vibe of, and knowing how to celebrate things, I think is really neat.
yeah,
Finding, so much of Facebook and social media is my kid made honor roll, which is
yeah,
great. Other people's celebrations don't demean our celebrations. It can often just feel a little isolating. We often don't have, oh, my kid just won his little league baseball championship. Often, sports are not really things that are that vibe well with our kids, or that are designed in a way that our kids can really enjoy fully or
yeah,
participate fully. And so, with less things to kind of celebrate in that way, I love being able to post to my community on Facebook and being like, oh my gosh, yesterday my child literally tried a saltine cracker out of nowhere, y'all, out
nice.
of nowhere. And everyone is like, are you serious? How did you
Yeah,
do it? What did he say? How did he react? And having people really understand,
yeah,
and not out of pity or not out of, but from a very understanding point of view.
yeah.
It's
No,
different.
I think being able to celebrate those wins with people would be pretty important for sure. Is there any particular like Facebook groups you recommend, or should people look for just ones close to where they live, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I've noticed the bigger Facebook groups get, it often gets kind of spammy because
Mhm.
how can you really regulate
Yeah,
who
it's just too
people
big.
in really big groups? And then you get a lot of parents just desperate for answers. So they're going anywhere and everywhere to ask questions. So sometimes it's just entire Facebook groups or pages just filled with questions. Now, if that's somewhere that sounds like a good place to you, I think that's fantastic. If you want to be one of the people who asks a whole bunch of questions, I think that's great. Um, I don't necessarily know that because you get such a wide variety of answers, because it's a wide variety of people. And as we all do, we all have a hard time discerning whether that's a, evidence-based answer and that's just like a heavy metal detox answer. And
Mhm.
no, thank you. So I think a lot of newer parents can be led astray on some of the bigger pages from other parents sharing information that isn't necessarily evidence-based.
Mhm.
And that's okay, that's valuable to them, but we're in a vulnerable position when we are seeking information about something we don't have a lot of answers for. So honestly, I'd recommend local Facebook groups like you discussed, because then you can get more logistical things like
Yeah.
where is a autism friendly or sensory friendly trampoline park,
Mhm.
or where is an accommodating like indoor play area, or do you know of any autism friendly horseback riding places or autism friendly swim lessons? And then at least locally, I've gotten to know a lot of the nonprofits that do a lot of work for autistic families locally, and I think there's 4 or 5 that are pretty prominent in Virginia, which I've appreciated, and they provide big lists of resources and therapies and doctors and community centers and videos and sensory friendly events that they create and host. And then they can also uh, tell you about places not to go.
Yeah.
Had this not great experience here. I wouldn't recommend them. Or I took my kid for a haircut here. They refused to cut his hair. Or same with schools. Anytime someone is moving somewhere and they need to know what schools are like, don't ask the school.
Yeah.
And they could be telling the truth and telling you how fabulous they are. They really could. But anyone is going to say how fabulous they are. Anyone selling you a car is going to be like, this is the best
Yeah.
car
Best
that's
car
ever
ever. Yeah.
existed, right? So talk to the parents and say which public education system, which district is best, which school is best. Give me the good, bad, the ugly, and you'll get a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's from people who again are coming from a perspective that understands you and
Yeah.
what information exactly you want to hear, um, without stuff that you don't want to hear. So that's
Yeah. That's great
honestly
advice.
what I would say.
Yeah. So, in what ways have you fostered communication and relationships between your child and their social networks? And any advice on things that worked for you and things that didn't, you would advise other parents to try?
So social networks. So um,
Like play
I
dates, or
and
like
that's so true.
how does that work for you?
We I think because we lived in Korea for 6 years
Hmm.
before we moved back here to America about a year and a half ago. So for 6 years, we were in a pretty small American overseas community. If
Yeah,
you were
that's a pretty
American and
unique
not military,
experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess in relating it more back to being back in the States, which would be more applicable to people listening. Um, I think what's really hard is to not apply pressure
Hmm.
to socialize, because we just want something to catch so dang bad. But I think it can really backfire as far as someone equating that with what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me just wanting to hang out, just me? Or
Yeah.
what's wrong with me wanting to hang out with you, mom? Or you don't like hanging out with me? Or so I just think providing them opportunities, and then when that opportunity isn't something they end up being interested in, being fine with that. And
Yeah.
maybe internally you're disappointed, but externally, and what you're showing them is that's okay. I love that you tried. We tried going to a local kind of indoor gym place. We were really excited about it. We went. My husband and I came back later because it was like a respite night care kind of thing. And my youngest had hated it.
Mm.
And so, just like we do with food, just like we do with other experiences, we're like, well, I think it's so great that you tried and we really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Mom and dad got some time to like remember that we liked each other, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And and were there any like good things about it? Did you like doing this? It's okay to not like things. That's okay.
Yeah.
Um, so we do a lot of try and fail, swing and a miss, and that's okay. We try not to attach any sort of guilt or doom or you should be grateful or what are we going to do about you and this, because then their aversion to those kind of activities just increases so much
For
more.
sure.
And that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah.
You as a parent just want to like fix that and be like, no, you will have a good time. You all love this. I will say that locally, over time, my children have both developed local friends, and just like probably one in particular per friend. So we don't, um, again, force them to socialize. We don't bring them to playgrounds and say, go play with those kids, nothing like that. But if they find a particular fondness for a classmate who seems to reciprocate that, and I get in touch with their parents, and then we set up play dates, yes, we will
Yeah.
continue that as long as both kids are having a good time. Other than that, we don't force a lot in our
Yeah.
house.
Yeah. That's great advice. So what has been your experience with the educational system? And how have you advocated for your kid, and what actions have you had to take to get the best kind of educational services?
um, so having two kids, experiences have been varied. Both of my kids are autistic but present very differently. My oldest is very academically gifted. He um, just very smart. That academics is not something that he has to try very hard with.
Yeah.
I've never seen him do homework before. He's in
Nice.
like eighth grade, so he just like comes home and I'm like, what? He's like, oh, I do it all at school. And I'm like, someday it's going to bite you
Yeah.
in the butt because you're not going to know how to plan yet. And you're not going
Yeah.
to, which I actually have in his IEP because I don't want that to sort of, take the legs out from under him, that he
Yeah.
doesn't know how to write in a planner or plan for a more stressful, heavy loaded academic schedule, which is coming in the future.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say some of the more impactful moments that I've had in the public education system have been when I am hearing one thing from a little birdie, the teacher, calling me. So things that are not on record saying, if you repeat that you told me this, I will deny it up and down. Your son did not have his one-to-one aid today. They never showed up. There was no sub that was gotten. Uh, there was just nobody, and I do whatever you want with that information. I did not tell you. And
Yeah.
then I'd have the administration on the other side saying, I don't know what they're talking about. Oh, that, okay. Well, it wasn't that big of a deal. Our vice principal was out, when all the buses arrived. She could just kind of see him. It's not like he was totally unsupervised. He was just one of like 600 kids all getting off the bus.
Yeah.
So the one-to-one handoff that he had in his IEP, he was, it was fine. It was
Yeah.
fine. And so just seeing that duality, and realizing that the public education system is not a place like many would consider like the dentist. I don't know anything about dentistry, right? But I go to the dentist, I do my part, I brush my teeth and floss usually. And I hope that when the dentist looks and if they find something, that I can trust what they're saying.
Yeah.
They're saying, no, really, it's in your best interest if this and this happens, or this is what's going to happen. And I can just trust that individual. And that's generally, of course, there are crooks everywhere, but generally we can trust where we go. Unfortunately, often within the public education system, we can't. That's what we expect. So many parents go into those meetings saying, these are the professionals. I'm hearing from, a panel of 2 teachers, a principal, a vice principal, a special education director, and, this whole room of people. And then there's me.
Mhm.
And I'm saying, I don't know, this doesn't look good. And everyone else is saying, it's fine. And not just being okay with that and just agreeing to that. I wish I didn't have to learn that, but I
Yeah.
did. When we moved to this area, my youngest son is actually in a private school for autistic children at the public's expense.
Nice.
So I had to, and that's considered his LRE, his least restrictive environment, which is part of FAPE, a free appropriate public education, that the child is in an environment where the least amount of restrictions are being applied, that he is given the opportunity to succeed as much as possible and be among non-disabled peers. So for him to be in that private school in that placement must really mean that the environment he was in before was not good. And I had to prove through data and evidence and conversations and reports home of incidences and things like that, that his rights were being violated, that they could not provide a free appropriate public education where he was at within the public education school that he attended, which is hard to prove, but I did. And
Yeah.
as long as the district says, yes, we agree, then it is their financial responsibility to find private placement. And then he still has all of his rights intact when it comes to Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA.
Yeah.
If, like a lot of parents, I just know and feel this isn't right, this isn't good, but I don't know how to prove it. So I remove my child from the public education system of my own doing, and the district doesn't say anything as far as we were unable to read his rights. Then it's my financial responsibility to pay for his tuition, and he no longer has those rights because now you're not at a public institution. It's not publicly funded with federal dollars, it's privately funded. So as far as IEP goals, accommodations, all of those are no longer a right. So I really had to make sure I was doing it the right way. I am so grateful. I'm not grateful that I had to experience all of that, but I am grateful that it's an experience among many that I can bring people with me
Yeah.
in a journey of
A
here's
lot of
what
hard lessons learned. Yeah.
rather than just keeping it to myself and wow, that was really hard. I can help parents know you're not crazy. What you're asking for is not ridiculous. Here are better methods to more effectively get your child what they need. And as much as I want to help parents, I want to help the kids.
Yeah.
Parents, sure. But I know that helping a parent helps the child.
Yeah.
So while my focus in my videos and things is generally to parents, it's because I know the more equipped they are, they can advocate for their child. So it's really about their child having their needs met and being accepted.
Is there any way or any place you suggest a parent look to find an advocate or help educate themselves on ways to advocate better for their kids?
Yeah. So I'm an advocate, me, but apart from me, one of my of course I have it right here next to me. One of my absolute favorite books. I don't get any kickback. This is not a sponsorship. This is just a book that is like my right hand man. It's Rights Law, all about IEPs. I feel that there's this big disconnect between the knowledge, the laws, the really complicated verbiage that is laws,
Yeah.
and then being able to understand that as a person who's not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a
Right.
therapist, and yet I need to be all these things to advocate for my child to get their civil rights, which is ridiculous. What I love about this particular book, you can get it on Amazon. There's an e-version, there's a paperback version. I like to highlight and touch things. That's how it gets in my brain. it teaches it and shares things in a way that's very user friendly and addresses it via questions. So, my child has an insulin pump. Is the school responsible for maintaining or replacing this device? But that's so random and specific, and yet it
Yeah.
answers it right there. And then it also references each point it makes or answer it gives to the specific law. So I find that resources are either one of two things. They're either so law focused that I can't understand what the heck they're talking about, or it's like the rights and procedural safeguards they offer every family at the
Uh-huh.
beginning of an IEP. It's so basic that it doesn't tell me anything that would
Right.
help. It's just like, you're a parent. Good job. You can have a meeting if you want. High five. We care about your child. Thank you. And it's like, that didn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
So, what I love about this particular book, and honestly, how I try to share content, is bringing both of those together to make something that's really complicated, broken down, easier to be applied, shorter, more succinct things that focus on questions that we often have, and then still referencing the actual law, because unfortunately, our opinion as parents isn't valuable.
Right.
But when we back that opinion up with facts and evidence and data, and then we can tie those facts, evidence, and data to a state standard of learning, then we have it. You have your
Yeah.
evidence for whatever accommodation it is that you're going for.
Yeah. That's great advice. I'll throw that book in the show notes for
It's
sure.
awesome,
Yeah. I haven't heard of that one before, but it sounds like that'd be a really valuable
life
book.
changing.
Yeah. So I guess this is like an overall question, but can you share any strategies or techniques that have been helpful in supporting your child's development and managing challenges?
Mm,
Like is
once I, and I've alluded to this before, once I made the connection between here and here, that all behavior is communication. So
Mhm.
I've intellectually understood that idea for quite some time, but I couldn't emotionally grasp that. So I still internalized my child's behavior. It was still a reflection of me and my parenting, whatever. When those two areas could marry and I could really grasp all behavior is communication. What are they trying to tell me? What are they expressing and why? And then it became so much more of, first of all, I didn't have all this associated angst, guilt, anxiety of how I, Laura Hales, factor into his behavior.
Yeah.
I don't. Yay!
Right.
So I don't have to figure that part out.
Hmm.
I What I do is in my mind I sort of push pause on myself, and then I address the behavior. So I know that I need to stay regulated, and he can only meet how regulated I am. So if I am dysregulated, he doesn't have sort of that touchstone of calmness to meet. And it helps me think more clearly. It helps me stay out of resentment, which can be very difficult and very understandable. When I realize that my child is not doing this to me, they're just having a hard time.
Yeah.
Um, and then I can, if my child falls and skins their knee, I'm not going to take that personally. I'm not going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
what does this mean? I
Right.
failed. I'm not going to get angry at their distress. I'm going to say, oh my gosh, how can I help you? I'm so sorry that happened. Band aid, water. And that's how we need to start treating these emotional struggles is you have an emotional skin knee. Okay, I see that. It makes sense why you're yelling.
Hmm.
You're in a lot of pain emotionally. Okay, so water, emotional band aid, hug, assurance, space, whatever it is that works for your kid. Um, and then believing them. I think that's a really hard thing for community members and parents to do is believe your child's anxiety. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we feed into it, that we're like, yes, the world is this and everyone is out to get you. But just, yeah, I hear that. Hmm. Yeah, that
For
makes
sure.
sense. Hmm. Or because then the person spends so much time, the autistic individual spends so much time just trying to be heard, that they're kind of stuck on that part. That if you refuse to even just hear and validate what they're saying, they're going to spend all their time trying to get you to just understand before they can move
Yeah.
on. If you can just hear them, that sounds really hard.
You're jumping forward a lot if you can just get that out of the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If you can just, I hear that. Ooh,
Yeah.
that's so hard. I hate that. What
Yeah.
else?
That's great advice.
Yeah, and again, I can get out of my own way, honestly. I don't I don't have time to be anxious about things that aren't actually in existence, like
Yeah.
aren't real. And me inserting myself into my child's behavior is worrying immensely, reasonably, I understand it, but worrying about something that isn't accurate, doesn't
Hmm.
exist. And that effort and emotional effort is very precious to me because I
Yeah.
have a lot that I need to give. And so when I can conserve it for things that actually exist, I find I function a lot better.
Yeah. No doubt. So, what was the role of therapy or other interventions in your child's development, and how did you work with professionals to support your child? Like you said, OT before. What other therapies have you done, and what's been effective? Is there anything that hasn't? Anything you would do different?
um, I don't know that we do anything different because with both my kids, it was very early intervention. And I'm
Good.
huge. I mean, the data is absolutely clear. Early intervention is key. It's
It's the biggest factor, I think. Like the kids
absolutely,
we see, the younger we get them, the more the impact we can make. And
absolutely.
yeah, it's really dramatic.
It's I don't want to say make or break, but it just sets a whole entire different course
Yeah.
for a child's ability to become the adult that they want to be and make choices that they want to make. So both of my kids have had speech and occupational therapies inside of school and outside of school. Um, Otherwise, not a lot of other therapies. My oldest had some, I wouldn't necessarily say CBT, like not necessarily behavioral therapy, but some just, I'd say more general emotional health therapy, where he just got to express himself some more. Speech therapy wise, work on some more like pragmatic skills, how to express himself when he's frustrated or angry, um, help learn about why his friends may react in a not great way if you express yourself this way. And
Yeah.
it can hurt people's feelings if you say things like this. Um, and I have to say, probably a lot of therapy like interventions at home. I was constantly doing everything that I could find, and not necessarily in a clinical way, but just how I speak to them. Um, Again, once I learn something that's like backed by data and evidence, and I see is effective with my kids, I cling on to that, and that's now part of what I know to be effective. So, validating their experiences and believing them when they're distressed. Um, Knowing that we need to emotionally regulate together, that co-regulation piece, providing them tools through a more educational perspective of, um, I see you have a low tolerance for failing. That doesn't mean you're a terrible person. That
Yeah.
means that you don't have a very high tolerance for it. So let's learn about that and let's practice it. And it's more of a teaching educational standpoint than like a punishing. You should feel terrible because you're a 5-year-old autistic child who struggles with losing. We all do.
Yeah.
Let's learn about that more together. Um, so a lot of at home, and that's not to be like I'm incredible. I'm just saying I did a lot of work, and
Yeah.
I paid very close attention to the therapies they were involved in, and a lot of time spent with putting myself in their shoes. And part of that was to love them more and better. And I have to say, part of that was out of need and necessity
Mhm.
as a parent, because when you parent an autistic child and they have a sort of sensory menu of things planned and unplanned, that could trigger a big emotional response and a full meltdown, whether we were in public or private. There's this urgency within you as a parent that says you have to be 10 steps ahead of wherever they are.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't necessarily know that that's healthy. I just know that that's what happened with me. Um, so in doing that, I had to put myself in their place all the time. So I know that he's probably hungry. He told me about the stress at school. His teacher sent a text that said he struggled with this. He woke up at this time in the middle of the night. He's probably exhausted. Whatever it is, fully putting yourself in someone else's context to be able to understand what they may need or what they may be struggling with in a current moment, was really valuable to me. And
Yeah.
I know that I have some behavioral therapist friends and followers who are like, I share your videos with my parents because the way I speak about it is from a parental perspective, and it still makes clinical sense.
That's
Um,
great.
and again, storytelling is just a really efficient way to get across really important information.
No doubt, for sure. So, what advice would you have for parents in finding the right balance between support and independence with the kid with autism?
Ooh, that's hard because it's always fluctuating.
Yeah.
Um, and you hope it's always fluctuating because that means that growth is happening. Um, I I have to say, give yourself more grace, that it's okay as a parent if you fail sometimes at that. I think if you're aware that you're failing, that you're being at least aware enough to notice those discrepancies, or say,
Yeah,
you know,
for
I
sure.
think we're ready to push further on this. If you're just oblivious and you're like, well, I'm pretty good, that's when I'm concerned. That's when I'm like, I love the confidence. I think that's great. Um, let's look more detailed. Like, what are you doing now, and what's one step more for your child? So for example, it could be things as small as, in food therapy there's a lot of exposure
Mhm.
involved. So it's just tolerating the food in the same room, and that's for like a good week. And
Yeah.
then it's tolerating the same food eaten by someone else at the same table at the same time. And then it's tolerating the food being next to them, but not on their plate. Then it's on the plate. But they still don't have to eat it. And then it's touching it. And then it's touching it to their nose. And then it's touching it to their tongue. And then it's smelling it. There's so many more
Yeah.
steps
A lot of steps.
involved than just like eat it. And those are steps that it's slow because it's without trauma.
Yeah.
Once we try to skip all those steps, it's hard to keep that trust with a child who is saying, I'm scared, I don't want to do this, and
Yeah.
you're making me do it. So it's almost like a slow and steady wins the race, but it keeps your relationship with your child intact and that trust intact, um, while still working on their progress. So I say, as long as whatever methods you are currently using with your child, that the next week it's okay, and one more, whatever that
Right.
is, I think that's great. Like, my kids' focus right now for food therapy category of things is not even necessarily trying a ton of new things and succeeding. It is that we're keeping the variety of foods that we have. So usually what happens is one favorite kicks in and one favorite gets kicked out. And
Right.
then we kind of rotate through these favorites where he's eating just this one particular food all the time, which obviously isn't healthy. So instead of being like, try cantaloupe, try strawberries, try blueberries, it's just, okay, now we have Cheez-Its and fries
Mhm.
and white Cheez-Its and this kind of chocolate and pizza, and that there's this variety involved. And
Yeah.
so realizing that that's still a success, and not being too hard on yourself. Again, this isn't, while we as parents are heavily involved, this isn't for your sake.
Right.
This is for your child's sake. And if I constantly have to check myself, is this goal for me or my child? Am I wanting them to accomplish this goal because then I'll feel like I'm a good mom and he's going to be okay, whatever that means. Like, as long as he can get a vegetable in there, he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We're going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. My role as a parent is, is that goal for me, or is that where he's
Yeah.
at?
That's a great question to ask.
And that's really hard. Like,
Yeah.
again, my empathetic self totally understands that. My reality self says to that parent, like, you got to ask yourself, am
Yeah.
I parenting out of fear of my life and what it could be in the future, or what I need, or am I parenting my kid for what they need?
Yeah. That's great. So
Thanks.
what's been some of the biggest challenges you've come across in your experience as being an autism parent?
Apart from the public education system that I talked about before, and it's one of those things where until it's you, you don't know.
Hmm.
So I get that. I would say probably my own mental health, unfortunately. And I think that makes a lot of sense. There have
Yeah,
been
for sure.
times where I have said, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did my combination of depression and anxiety that I generally experience throughout my life make my parenting journey more difficult? Or did my parenting journey make
Yeah.
my depression and anxiety more intense? I often find myself wondering um, if any parent, even if they were the peak example of mental health and had all access to money and therapy in the world, would still feel this amount of anxiety, trepidation, concern, constant racing thoughts of like, what can I do better? How can I help more? What would be more effective? Um, yeah, sometimes, uh, and that's, and I guess you did ask about me as a parent. I was going to say it's kind of icky to be like, well, me as a parent,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's probably my hardest one. And then also balancing that concern with, this is reality though. This isn't like I am exaggerating my concerns, or that I'm looking at it through like a um, inappropriate lens, like an unrealistic lens. Like, this is just a very demanding parenting role that I have.
Yeah. No doubt.
Would any individual feel this way? You know,
Yeah.
is has been like a tricky thing for me to handle. I just am grateful that the behavioral kind of things that I've had to understand about my children, I've been able to apply to myself. Where instead of being angry at myself for feeling that or wondering that or projecting that outward, my kids have taught me to be curious about the emotions that I am experiencing, and times that I'm struggling, or times that I feel like I am emotionally
Yeah.
spent.
Like,
Why?
why
What's
am I
going
feeling this way?
I can
Yeah.
look inward and
Yeah.
say,
That's
that's
great.
strange. Let me look at that. Because so many people, autistic or not, are horrific at that. And they push that
Yeah.
outward and they
Yeah.
take it out on their partners or their kids or their bosses or whatever it is. So I'm really grateful that they made me equip myself with tools
Yeah.
where I can unravel a lot of those things myself.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how would you, I again, you're pretty much answering my questions before I answer them. That's pretty good answers. How do you find hope and positivity in the face of those challenges?
Hmm. I feel like hope is a tricky thing. I have had to redefine for me what hope is. Uh, and again, there's that kind of pendulum swing within social society of like, at first we should be ashamed that we have disabled children, and oh, what a shame that your child is autistic, and
Yeah.
oh, you know, and then we sort of swung to the opposite side as society, that is, no, you are an autism mom and this is about you and your journey and your life. It's like, well, yeah, no, like, I'm the
Yeah.
parent in this situation, but their struggle is not um my life's burden to succeed through and push through, and that's who they are to me, is this burden to succeed through, my success story. That's not that either. And so finding that middle place of, my child doesn't need to be anything. They just need to be. They
Yeah.
are them. And all these goals that we are constantly working on, and these uh, successes that we find to celebrate, these moments that we find for teaching. Well, I can see that you don't have a very high tolerance for this. Like, let's learn about that together. Are so much more about the health and happiness of my child, given their neurodiversity, and how I can help them best, instead of how can I make them look successful in the eyes of society. Um, and so hope for me is not that, my child will become this thing that I have created in my mind. My hope for my child is that they will be happy, and
Yeah.
that they will have the tools to create and make decisions about what makes them happy, and facilitate that. I feel like my role as a parent is a teacher and facilitator. So if something is inaccessible for my child for whatever reason, I will make it accessible. I will get whoever it is involved and say, nope, you are not in compliance. You will be doing this for my child.
Yeah.
And then if they decide that, hey, I don't want to do football, cool, you don't need to. What else are you interested? How can I support you? So I suppose that's hope for me, is it's now and it's daily, and future wise, it's just continuing the today and now further forward.
Yeah.
That hope of, I don't know, that almost seems tied with the sound of like finding a cure.
Right.
And that's not what I want for my child. He doesn't need a cure. He needs support, he needs acceptance, and he needs tools. And that's what I want to provide for him. And I want him to know that his choices and his happiness are the most important things to me. And again, not like a focus on, well, we're struggling on these goals, or we need to do this therapy more, or,
Right.
whatever it is, that I celebrate his happiness.
That's great. So how would you say your perspective on parenting or just life in general changed based on your experience as a parent with autism?
Um, I think we all experience a moderate amount of being slapped in the face when we become a parent ourselves. We all think we have it figured out. My child's never going to behave that way.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I feel like I have a moderately good head on my shoulders. I work really hard. I am thorough with what I present as far as me as a parent. I'm consistent. I'm all these things. And autism said, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
good for you. All those methods are not going to be, now the determination and hard work, yes, you can bring those right
Yeah.
along, but those specific things, and you thinking you have any exact control over another human being's behavior is ridiculous. And I'm going to make sure, this is, fate talking, I'm going to make sure that you know that.
Yeah.
And I can guide, I can provide, I can, like I said, make accessible, I can advocate, I can provide support and love. I cannot force another human being to do anything. And letting go of that expectation of myself and of my child has been wonderful. So you made that choice. Oh, there's going to be some consequences to that choice. Like, I don't know if your friend's going to want to hang out with you if you do that.
Right.
Or, remember when you said to me like 10 minutes ago, this really mean thing? I'm not really mad about it. My feelings are still really hurt. Oh, I'm just going to be over at the kitchen table. I just need some space. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we just support any behavior that comes out, just because our child has a disability or struggles. But we use every opportunity to teach
Yeah.
more methods, more understanding, more empathy, and provide more tools for him to make the decisions that he wants to.
Yeah. Wow. So what advice would you have for parents who are just starting out on this journey and who are kind of unsure of where to go, or feeling overwhelmed, unsure of what to do next?
Um, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Um, I think sort of the more overwhelming it may feel, maybe you're actually grasping what's happening.
Hmm.
I feel like there are some times when they're like, oh yeah, and it's no big deal. And it's like, I love him and he is who he is. And it's like a fresh diagnosis that I'm like, that's great. And I'm thinking in my head, because it's none of my business, but in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm thinking, I really hope that's genuine, because if it's not, and if it's for show, it's gonna fester, and
Yeah.
at some point it's gonna break. And just, it's okay. Um, any kind of feeling makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
Um, I'd also say get on wait lists as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think that there are openings and availabilities for these
That's
kinds of
not the
things.
case.
No, there
Yeah.
are wait lists for months, even years, for
Yeah.
certain facilities, certain doctors, certain therapies.
Yeah. Especially depending what area you're in. Like
Absolutely.
if you're out in the middle of nowhere, like your options are pretty limited and you can be waiting a while.
That's true. It's
Yeah.
totally true. Same for school services. Uh, inform them officially as soon as you can. And that can sound scary to think, oh, now I have this big to-do list of all these things I need to do. That's just one thing. Think of that one thing to do. Get any kind of process going. If you're not sure if it's the right thing, sign up anyway.
Yeah.
Sign up, get your name on, decide you don't want it, then you can take me off that list. I'm good,
Yeah.
actually. Get on multiple waiting lists for various places. Oh, I actually got in here. I don't need that one anymore. Great,
Yeah.
great. But access to services is one of those things that parents think that it's like picking up something at the grocery store, that they can just go and get it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's one of those you learn through experience, usually, kinds of things. And we're talking about very needed therapies and services that your child is waiting a year or more to have
Yeah.
during really crucial developmental time, where they're developing emotional associations with the world. They're going to learn they hate school. They're going to learn that they're a failure. They're going to learn that mom is always frustrated with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a lot. It's just a very vulnerable time. So the sooner you can get professional help, the better.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more to get on multiple lists and just get on everything you can,
Yep. And
like
if,
as
like
quick
I
as you
said, if
can.
you find out later, well, I'm not sure if I should even be on that list. Is that one I
Yeah.
should? Okay, well,
Yeah. That's okay.
unless it
There's
like costs $100 to get on a list, which it
yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah.
get on the list. Get on the list, and you can figure it out later as you go.
Yeah. So what have you come to understand about the autism condition in general? Like, how do you describe it?
Um, I find it to be very human. Um, and while I would never say I get it from a standpoint of I am autistic, because I don't believe I am,
Mhm.
um, once you understand the sensory experiences a lot of autistic individuals are having constantly, struggles they may be having with interoception, being able to read their body's own signals,
Mhm.
being hungry, being tired, being overheated or cold, having a headache, and not being able to understand those signals and how that could affect you. Um, their behavior to me just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
If I were in that position,
No, you'd be behaving the same way.
it makes
Yeah.
so much sense.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's what has really come full circle to me. Is it was at first so much more about learning about this other community, this different, separated group of, wow, this is so different, and I'm learning about it. Full circle to these are the behaviors, but these are the why of the behaviors, and then coming around to, well, that makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
get. And then realizing that I do a lot of stimming, understanding a lot of my own behaviors as a what I assume is a neurotypical person. My poor cuticles and fingers I pick to death, and I don't mean to.
Yeah.
It's just something that I do without thought.
Yeah.
And if that was, demonized and I was guilted about that constantly, or made to feel, if people laughed at me when I did that, yeah.
Yeah. It's
And
pretty
it
wild
really
to think
makes me
about.
like empathetic to the whole human experience, that everybody, that rarely do we have an existence in the world, people who are real villains, who are just out to be evil and do evil things and be bad and bother people and whatever it is. There's, even lately with context backstories to villains, a lot of times by the end of a villain's backstory, we're like, you know what?
Yeah. Sort of understand.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm kind of rooting for him now. Like, I know he's a bad guy, but I kind of
Yeah.
get it. Um, so, and not just for autistic individuals, but it helped me understand that overall, as a whole, just people are generally doing the best they can
Yeah.
with what they have, the tools they have, their upbringing, and their context, where they are right now in life with their context. So it's helped me be so much more understanding, compassionate to people, period. We are all having a really hard time.
Yeah.
And we all have great moments too, right?
Yeah.
But just that shared understanding that I don't know, it sounds like such martyrish kind of vibes, but just like we all understand what it's like to have a hard time and suffer.
Hmm.
Um, and to know that it's not just me and I have the hardest life on the planet. It's that we all experience that. And obviously not in the same ways, but we all have a really hard time. And I find that to be so humbling and connecting with
Yeah.
people.
That's a great perspective.
Famous celebrities, they have all the money and fame that they want,
Yeah.
and
They're still
we see
miserable.
that they're some of the most miserable people that
Yeah.
there are. And so I've really appreciated the kind of compassion that just with random strangers that I can have.
Yeah. That's great. So, what are your thoughts about the future of autism research, and where do you hope to see the field go?
So, there have been talks about, and I don't know that I'm necessarily for this happening, but there have been talks about science reaching being able to diagnose it in utero,
Mhm.
or diagnose it just after birth, like a pre-screen before you
Yeah.
leave the hospital.
Right.
Um, and from what I understood of the science, they were talking about not that it's, well, look, their blood says this, because we know that's not
Right.
how autism is diagnosed. But more like,
Looking for like genetic markers, or is that something kind of
genetic
what you're referring
markers.
to?
I think what the study I was reading was talking about was, and this was at I think it was University of Virginia Tech. They were talking about more of a, not yes or no, but percentage wise, there's
Mhm.
like a 60% chance. So it's something more to give parents like a flag of look for
Yeah.
these things on the horizon, so that they can just be more informed when it comes to a diagnosis time, or it comes to if they're seeing other signs in accompaniment with that pre-screening, what they the professionals observed about behavior. Now, is that necessarily where I want it to go? I think that's tricky. I I just want more support and acceptance. So I don't know that that would provide it.
Yeah.
But that is where I see a lot of the future of autism going, is medically, at least scientifically, toward more specific diagnoses where it's a yes or no factor, or maybe they figure it out as a certain mixture of genes or chromosomes, or um, where they can say yes or no.
Hmm.
I do see science more going that way. But as far as where I hope it goes, um, and it's more society rather than just autism. I hope as a society that we can just be more compassionate
Yeah.
and more willing to believe that people around us, in spite of however they're behaving, are doing their best. And generally that is true. That doesn't mean we don't have bad days or we don't make mistakes, but generally everybody that you meet is doing their best.
Yeah.
And when you can approach people in that way, and you don't have to fight judgment in your mind where it's just like, wow, this is that person's best. That must be really hard.
Yeah.
I wonder what kind of upbringing they had where this is that person's best, or what, I wonder what their context is and what has led them to this point. I really hope that people begin to see how valid the autistic experience is and how human the autistic experience is, that it's not this other category. It's this is how these humans feel and behave,
Yeah.
and not as a whole, but just individually. And their reasons why make a lot of sense.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
you would probably feel that way. And again, not just for autistic people, but for every person, that if you could know their context or their whys, you would probably understand their behavior. So I hope, and that's what I really push for in my books and my advocacy, is to help people come from a compassionate, informed perspective instead of a fearful, judgmental perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that was all my questions. Can we just recap all the places people can find you in your books? So if anyone's listening, they can reach out, or maybe buy one of your books, or give you a follow on TikTok.
Yeah, you can buy 500 of them if you want. On TikTok, I'm Laura Hales 28, and that's just my name. On Instagram, it's The Drummer Stories, and on Facebook, it's just my name, Laura Hales. I'm the only Laura Hales that has a pink mullet, so you can
Okay.
pretty
Easy to
easily
spot. Yeah.
identify who it is. I post daily. Usually it's a short video that gives some sort of tip, whether it's in the public education system, advocating for your child, or a behavioral suggestion, helping parents, again, parent from a compassionate, understanding perspective, rather than focused only on making their child do something or be
Yeah.
something. But understanding, well, this is why that's a struggle for them. Working memory, they don't have a lot of space for it. They can't hold that information there. So
Yeah.
let's put it on some pictures. And then
Awesome.
suddenly it's like you're accommodating in a way that your child is being successful. Um, yeah, that had nothing to do with telling people where they can find me. You can find my books at Walmart, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. But again, if you
But your
order
website's
my
best too.
site, it'll be
Yeah.
signed. I have a whole lot of really fun, like t-shirts and stickers and tumblers and things that are all very autism affirming and diversity affirming, and just you affirming, like loving who you are and embracing that with flaws and everything, and an acknowledgement that we are all doing our best.
Yeah.
And not just autistic people, but everybody, we're all doing our best, and that means that we're all in it together. If we could understand that a little bit more, I think we would have a lot
Yeah.
less
Get
friction,
along a lot better.
camaraderie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was great. Well, thanks so much for sitting down and talking with me. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank
All right.
you. I
Yeah.
loved it. I'll go have my wine now.